Well, welcome back, everyone, to this Voice of the CIO IT Mythbusters edition. I am excited to welcome you back for episode 7. My co-host here, Suresh. Good to see you again, Suresh.
Hey, thanks, Mike, for having us. And it's always a treat to see what is in store for this today.
Yeah, so like always, we've asked the audience for a series of topic ideas or myths that they wanted us to bust. And so for today, the topic that was brought forward is a question around something I know you are incredibly knowledgeable about. And I'm looking forward to discussing this with you today. And the question on the table is, are DevOps and SRE the same thing?
That's a nice one. I think there's a lot of buzz around these two words of DevOps and SRE. So bring it on.
All right. So maybe what I would have you do, Suresh, is start with telling us a little bit about what SRE is, right? SRE is an acronym. Some of our audience may not be familiar with the acronym. What is SRE? Let's start there.
Right. So SRE stands for Site Reliability Engineering. And this word was coined by Google way back in 2003. It's very interesting that about 17 years later, we are talking about site reliability engineering. So it has been there for quite a long time, though has been in the territory of Google for a long period of time when they talked about scalability and trying to look at user experience. But that is now catching up big time for organizations worldwide around site reliability engineering. So it's been there for a quite long time. That's focusing on user experience, because today reliability and resilience are going to be incredibly important. People are using social media for any time you have a downtime. People don't want to have any downtime. They want all applications and systems to be running 24/7, 365 days. So that's where I think the site reliability engineering is getting a predominant importance in the industry today.
Yeah, I would think that Google has to have search up and running 24/7. So they probably know an awful lot about engineering a data center and IT landscape for high levels of reliability. So I think it'll be interesting to learn some more about that. Right. And then DevOps. A lot of our audience are probably familiar with DevOps, but give us a 30 seconds on what DevOps is.
So DevOps is more of a cultural and a professional movement, right? Where, first of all, dev doesn't mean it's developer and ops. That's a myth. Dev means anybody who in the value chain from...
Another myth for another day.
Requirement gathering, design, build, test, and deploy. So your solution architect, your product owner, your scrum master, they're all called dev. And anybody who gets involved post-deployment, basically your production support engineer, your system engineer, your DBAs, your suppliers becomes ops. So basically a cultural and professional movement where we bring in dev and ops together to finally achieve the goal of balancing velocity and stability. If you remember, velocity comes from the word of agile, where we used to ship new features and functionality, but it's not just about shipping new features. You need to also keep the system stable. So balancing between velocity and stability was the primary focus of doing it in a model of DevOps. And that also requires culture change, getting people all understanding the common goal and making sure the customer is happy.
So DevOps is all about stability. SRE is all about reliability. Stability and reliability seem like the same thing or awfully close, right?
Absolutely.
So is SRE just a DevOps in a new bottle, right? It's the old wine in a new bottle. It tastes the same, but looks a little bit different.
Well, that's a very interesting question, right? And we should take a step back and understand the evolution of how we have gone through this, right? If you look at DevOps as a philosophy that came into inception in 2008-9 in the Velocity Conference by a person called Patrick DeBois. Now, there was a real need of getting into understanding how we can all work together to a common goal. And from 2009 till now, we have gone a sea of change, right? So we have actually gone a lot more towards, towards moving towards cloud. So a part of our evolution from a DevOps standpoint has been because of the maturity that we have had in cloud. AWS, Azure, GCP, that has got better. Now, the problem is that when DevOps is kind of getting into building pipelines and moving this forward in terms of faster feedback flow and doing a lot of experimentation, sometimes DevOps seems to be that it's all about the CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous delivery, and continuous deployment. But what happens post-deployment? So then it comes to the baby of the infrastructure team or production support team. So I think the ability to carry on the pipeline beyond production is where I think the site reliability engineering comes in. So site reliability engineering, according to Google, is a class that implements DevOps. Now, if you look at it for a matter, you have gone from the developing a pipeline, you did a code commit, build, test, deploy, you're all done. And we allow the infrastructure folks to go there and look at monitoring and looking at app monitoring and infra and thresholds and stuff like that. But it's too late because you cannot really get into that level of reliability if you do not focus on shift left. So what is happening is the site reliability engineers are having the wisdom of production of something breaking out, but now they're going to go back and redesign something so that this could be made reliable and resilient. I have a lot of conversations. People say that we go into the cloud, so everything should be picture perfect. No, if your application crashes every time it hits X number of users, it's going to be of no use. So the thought process, again, from a site reliability engineering is to understand the wisdom of production, shift that ownership and find out how we can improvise things, but more importantly, focus on user experience. So in site reliability engineering, we talk about a term called SLOs, service level objectives, which is much beyond SLAs. Because you and I know, Mike, that service level agreements have been typically watermelon syndrome, right? Everything looks green outside from an SLA. The moment I open the watermelon, it is bleeding red. So how can you really go and improvise yourself in terms of user experience? So that's a little bit of difference, in my opinion, but you kind of see where you are in this journey and see how we can improvise it. So in my opinion, I think SRE is the purest form of DevOps in implementing DevOps in production.
So it sounds like, based on what you just described, that you can't really do SRE without DevOps.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. And I think if you look at this part, it's like, how do we evolve from agile to DevOps, right? We had focused on MVP, we focused on sprint, we focused on the user stories and started to get mileage from agile to DevOps, right? And it's a similar case. Now, DevOps is just not about building a pipeline, but how can you make it much more robust, resilient, and even build in that security element of it. So some people call Mike as DevSecops. So there is another version of DevOps emerging towards DevSecops. So what SRE is trying to do is trying to build in reliability, which means that you don't have unauthorized attacks. So I need to know something about security. Then I need to reduce the toil part of it, which is a lot of manual work that is going across. One example could be the developers having technical debt. So do you have time to refactor your code? That could be also a possibility. So SRE is now looking at the whole value chain from a perspective of, are we doing the right things from the beginning of the life cycle so that we can make this reliability and resilience not as an after effect, but something which is more sustainable. And that's where I think we're heading to.
So this is interesting to me. So as I've been hearing about some of these terms for a long time, I've been around in the industry for a while, but what I have most commonly heard about is DevOps in kind of the application world, along with Agile. And then I've heard SRE crop up more in the infrastructure world. So can you tell me how that all plays together? Because it sounds like, based on what you described, right, SRE really needs to be part of the application conversation as well.
Well, that's a great question that you asked, because one of the things that we have traditionally kind of struggled from an infrastructure management standpoint is that we don't get that level of recognition that developers get. So the infrastructure people always wanted to get a new avatar on Avengers, and they thought that SRE would be a good suite to kind of don and see how things work. Well, there is a lot more focus on getting that infrastructure as a code, looking at looking at packaging and stuff like that. You cannot do one thing without the other one. So both have to coexist. So if you look at IAC, you also need to have configurations of code like containers. So what's happening is in the whole industry, there is a lot of facelift for infrastructure people to say that with SRE, we will become more demanding. We will become more popular. So that has been the kind of the thought process people have been vouching towards infrastructure management. There is absolutely no doubt about the impact that the infrastructure management folks are going to have at an SRE. But that's just one part of the equation. Because if you don't really get to that other side of the spectrum, how are you going to kind of build a world-class solution? So doing just monitoring or infrastructure as a code or reducing toil alone is not sufficient. We need to have good engineering practices. You need to actually build a good DevOps pipeline. We need to actually understand to reduce technical debt. So without both hand in hand together, the SREs cannot be made successful. And that would probably also means you need to have some different skills in how we operate.
So let's talk about that. What skills should we be looking for if we're trying to bring DevOps into our organization, or if we're trying to bring SRE into our organization?
I think let's talk first about DevOps, right? A lot of times when I talk with people about DevOps, they say it's all about CI/CD pipeline. The term CI/CD pipeline has been most often abused in the industry, right? So it's just not about tool chain. They call it as tool chain. But what is more important is to understand what is the goal that you're trying to do and how will you balance between velocity and stability. Now, what is your deployment frequency? What is your lead time look like? How are you going to reduce your change failure rate? How can we make sure that your products and services is giving good an amount of value? So that's the focus of DevOps. So you definitely need to have technical skills, be it your understanding about your pipelines, understanding about technical practices, programming languages, whatever you call, and also about the ability to collaborate with cross-functional teams. I think a lot of the problem is that we don't have the culture change of working as one team, right? They always say that my work is only about releasing new features and looking at my release train. But no, it's not, because you also have to support your infrastructure folks or operations team so that we are able to continue this journey without any hassles. So that's another element of focusing on. When it comes to SRE, an SRE is a person who has a good understanding about infrastructure management, architecture practices. So whether you're moving from monolithic architecture to microservices or going to containers, we also have to understand
the technical architecture practices.
Exactly, right? And you have a lot more on EA practices and stuff like that we need to do, because the whole world is looking at whether we do lift and shift. Are we going to do refactoring? Are we going to do re-architecting from the legacy to another stuff? So I think the skills are going to be widely varied, from technical skills to infrastructure management to ability to communicate to business users, because we are going to focus on user experience. So how are we going to work with product owners, scrum masters to decide on error budgets? So I think both of these skills are complementary in nature. Your technical skills, your process skills, your understanding about agile, DevOps, lean, IT service management, and more importantly on cloud. Because with the whole imperative going towards cloud, without that knowledge, we are not going to get this one moving forward. So I think it's a combination of both technical skills, collaboration skills, and more importantly, business acumen to see how we can work towards that goal of delivering business value. So it's a combination of
and one of the things you mentioned, right, which I think is maybe not unique to IT, but is something I have seen an awful lot of in IT organizations throughout my career, is that IT departments tend to be very siloed, right? IT organizations, IT leaders, in a lot of cases, you started out as a developer and you spent your entire career in a development path up until you're a leader of the development organization, or you started out in infrastructure and you've stayed in infrastructure your entire career. It doesn't seem like in an IT organization, people move around across the various parts of IT. They don't have quite the same visibility and understanding to the entirety of the business of IT as we might like, right? And it sounds like, to your point, both Agile and DevOps as well as SRE seem like they're starting to push us towards taking more of a horizontal view
Right.
across the organization, focus more on the applications or the products and services that we're trying to deliver, versus that vertical view of, I'm a developer and I'm going to worry about getting my code out, or I'm a Java developer or a Python developer, or whatever it might be, right? Those specific vertical silos are becoming less and less important, and that horizontal perspective of how are we driving business outcomes through the applications that we're building, through the products that we're delivering, seems to be coming much, much more to the forefront.
Absolutely. So what do you think? Do you think DevOps and SRE are same thing from the conversation that we had?
I'm going to leave this one to you because you're the expert here. I've got an opinion, but what do you say? Have we busted this?
Now you have to bust it, because these are two different things, but they are complementing, right? But if it was just about DevOps, it's not old wine in a new bottle. There is a merit in what we are talking about. And SRE is a class that implements DevOps, and DevOps is about changing this whole dimension from looking at velocity and stability. So they are interrelated, they're complementing, but they're not the same thing.
Okay, so myth busted.
Excellent.
Well, before we wrap up today, given the topic, maybe what I'd ask you to do, Suresh, and I know we don't do advertisements in these sessions typically, but given the topic, it's particularly relevant, I think, for you to talk just a minute about your new SRE training that you're offering. So maybe tell us a little bit about that.
Thanks, Mike. We have been. I'm kind of glad that the Site Reliability Engineering Practitioner course has been launched by the DevOps Institute. So in the last year or so, we have trained close to about 800 plus people on Site Reliability Engineering. We are associated with the DevOps Institute as an elite partner. We do more of enablement and consulting on Site Reliability Engineering. The couple of courses that we are offering to the table for people globally who would want to kind of reskill themselves and upgrade themselves are Site Reliability Engineering Foundation course, which is a 2-day course that we bring to the table. And then we have the Site Reliability Engineering Practitioner course, which is a 3-day course. And I've been honored to be a part of the co-author for the Site Reliability Engineering Practitioner course. So we just did a couple of corporate batches. We have got some great feedback, because one of the Stephen Thorpe, who was part of Google, was part of also a co-author, and he said he has never ever seen such a detailed, exhaustive course, which is going to add a lot of value to practitioners. So we are really proud of our contribution to the community, not just as part of TaUB Solutions, but also giving back something as part of SRE practitioner course. So anybody who would like to understand what is SRE should start with Site Reliability Engineering Foundation. And to your point, we spend 1 hour just to give a basis of what is DevOps, SRE, Agile ITSM. So people get to spin around, what the heck are these frameworks and best practices playing around? And then once they get the basic understanding about error budgets, SLOs, user experience and tools, we go into a deep dive. So we do actually a chaos engineering on a live system. So tell people how you can do something. And that's been a very interesting part of the exercise. So people can log into our website, taubsolutions.com, and look at the upcoming training. So we keep posted of that. But I'm very passionate about this topic, because that's going to be the future of how every organizations are trying to design world-class reliability and resilience in the systems.
And this is a fairly unique offering. So it's very cool that you were part of creating this thing from the start. So I highly recommend this course to folks that are interested in learning more about SRE. It's a great course. It's a great set of content, and Suresh is a fabulous and incredibly knowledgeable teacher. So with that, apologize for the commercial, but thanks to everyone for joining us on our IT Mythbusters session today. We'll be back again soon with another episode. Great to see you, Suresh, as always.
Thank you so much, Mike. And thanks everyone for joining us. Take care.
Bye.